Rejection is something that everybody experiences, but for people with anxious attachment, it can feel especially difficult. A match on an app that suddenly stops responding, or a second date that just never happens, or a breakup that arrives sooner than we expected. These little moments can really impact people when they have anxious attachment style because they often awaken older fears of being left out or not measuring up. And this doesn't mean that we're overreacting. It does mean that our nervous system learned early on that closeness was not always reliable, and so it's carried that sensitivity into our adult relationships. And so when rejection happens, the body is often the first to feel it. Like maybe people notice tenseness in their shoulders, or they feel a restless need to make things right. So rejection may never feel pleasant, but it doesn't have to define us. And with practice, it can shift from something that tears us down into something that highlights where a connection wasn't truly aligned and open up space for something even better. By the way, I'm Kaylee Larkin. I help people to move past anxious patterns so they can build secure and lasting relationships. So, for people with anxious attachment, rejection often feels bigger than the situation itself. Even a simple no can often trigger fears that go beyond the moment that they're in. And what other people might see as just discouraging, with anxious attachment, we feel it as a confirmation of an old belief of like not enoughness, or that intimacy and closeness will just slip away if we don't hold on to it. And this is why so many people respond the way that they do. So for some people, it's replaying conversations in their head, searching for the exact moment when things went wrong. Other people second guess whether they came across as too much or not enough. And some people feel the pull to reach back out or to send another message hoping to restore that connection. And these patterns made sense at one time. They were ways of holding on to relationships where consistency wasn't there. But then, as adults, we aren't limited to those old strategies anymore. So rejection doesn't have to feel like proof that something's wrong with us. More often, it shows us that the other person couldn't meet us in the way that we needed. And that is some valuable information and some valuable clarity. And when we see rejection this way, it becomes less about loss and more about direction. So it frees us up to notice the connections that are reciprocal and that are truly secure. So sure, rejection will never feel good, but it doesn't have to leave us questioning our worth. And when we look at it differently, rejection becomes information about the connection, about the timing, or maybe about compatibility. So sometimes rejection can tell us that something in the connection wasn't a match. Maybe the other person wanted something casual while we were hoping for commitment. Or maybe conversations felt one-sided and they decided not to continue. And that's feedback. That's not proof that we're unlovable. That's evidence that that particular relationship wasn't aligned. And there are also times when rejection has more to do with life circumstances than it has anything to do with us. So one person might just be getting out of a long-term relationship and they're not yet ready to invest. Another person might be consumed with career or family responsibilities. And even if there was genuine interest, maybe the timing wasn't right. So that mismatch doesn't mean that we're inadequate. It just reflects a different stage of where people are at, like where they're ready or whether they're not ready. So attraction is important, but it isn't enough on its own. We need to have shared values, we need to have emotional availability, and we need to want the same kind of relationship. So, for example, someone might show a lot of initial enthusiasm, but then avoid those deeper conversations about the future. Or they might say that they want commitment, but then consistently prioritize everything else above the relationship. So incompatibility like this becomes clear over time, and rejection is what keeps us from investing further in something that can't truly support us. So when we view rejection through these lenses, it stops being a judgment on who we are And instead, it acts like a filter. So it clears up space for relationships that can actually meet us with steadiness and care. So, how do you go from rejection to resilience? Resilience doesn't mean that rejection stops hurting. It means we can move through the discomfort without losing our sense of ourselves, losing our values, or chasing after someone who's not showing up. When rejection happens, sometimes people's first response is like, oh, I gotta fix this. So some people send repeated messages, or they explain themselves in a whole bunch of detail, or they put in more effort to change the other person's mind. And other people turn inward. They pick themselves apart. They wonder what they should have done differently. And these reactions are totally understandable. But they also keep us focused on proving ourselves instead of noticing whether the other person is interested or available. In dating, it's totally fair to reach out once or twice if you haven't heard back. Messages can be missed, a follow-up shows that you're interested. But if there's still no response, continuing to reach out shifts into pursuing someone who has already chosen not to engage. So resilience in this moment means stepping back and reminding ourselves their lack of response is information, and I can let this go without making this about my worth. Grounding reminders can also help, like, this is not a judgment on who I am, and not every connection is meant to continue. So rejection simply creates space for a relationship that's better suited to me, and these are the kinds of reflections that can help to turn into resilience. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me? We can ask, gosh, what can I learn from this experience? Maybe we notice that we become attached very quickly, or that the other person wasn't ready for the same kind of relationship. These aren't reasons to self-blame. There are lessons that make it easier to recognize what feels consistent and reciprocal for next time. So resilience grows each time we redirect our energy from proving ourselves to protecting our well-being. And in that way, rejection becomes less about loss and becomes more about your clarity. So let's talk about how rejection can show up in the body, because rejection isn't something that we just think about. A lot of times people can feel it in the body. So a text doesn't come when we were hoping it would, and suddenly our stomach drops. Or a date feels a little distant and we notice our shoulders up around our ears without us even realizing it. Or someone might notice they're breathing shallow, or they have a heaviness, or a tightness in the throat, or a restlessness. Or some people feel like their energy shuts down completely. Now, none of that means that there's something wrong with us. It simply means that the nervous system is reacting to what felt like a loss of connection. And for people with anxious attachment style, the body has learned to pay really close attention to those signals. And the good news is, of course, when we notice them, we can respond with care rather than being kind of swept up with them. So because rejection is felt in the body, I often show people how to use simple practices that help the nervous system to settle. And these don't erase the sting of rejection, but they do make it easier to regain balance and respond from a calmer place. So one tool that I might suggest is a lengthened out breath. So I would guide someone to inhale for a count of 4, and then exhale for a count of 6. And the slower exhale helps the body start to shift towards calm. Another practice might be orienting to the environment. So asking someone to look around the room and name a few things that they see or that they hear. And this helps bring our attention back to the present moment instead of letting the mind kind of spiral with these what-if scenarios. These are the kinds of practices I might walk someone through after rejection. They help the body to register safety, and that makes it easier to step back and think more clearly, and then pick a response that feels secure rather than desperate. So the aim is not to make rejection painless. It's just to experience it without letting it remove our sense of self-worth. And every time we experience rejection, it gives us an opportunity to see it more clearly for what it is. So old patterns might still surface. People might notice themselves replaying every detail of the last date, wondering if they said the wrong thing. Other people might feel the urge to just keep reaching out even when there's no response, those reactions do make sense, but they don't have to guide our choices anymore. And what begins to shift is the meaning that we give rejection. So instead of interpreting it as I wasn't good enough, we can see it as confirmation that something important just wasn't quite aligned. So maybe the other person wasn't ready for a commitment, or maybe communication felt inconsistent from the very beginning. Maybe the values or priorities simply didn't match. And with that increased perspective, rejection turns from a blow to our identity into information about the connection itself. And when we hold it that way, it becomes easier to let go of what isn't working and then stay open to what will. So rejection is something that everyone runs into. Even people who seem confident and secure and completely at ease in dating still face unanswered texts and short-lived flings or relationships that don't last. It's just part of how connection works. Not every match is going to move forward. And for folks with anxious attachment, it's easy to forget that and take every rejection as a personal statement. But most of the time, it's not about whether we're good enough. It's about timing, priorities, or just that basic compatibility. And the truth is that even the most secure person in the world would have been rejected in the same situation. So remembering this bigger picture helps keep rejection in perspective. It doesn't mean we won't feel the sting, but it does remind us that rejection isn't proof of failure. It's just one way of narrowing down what does not fit. And every time it happens, it leaves more room for the kind of connection that does. So rejection's never fun, probably never will be, but it also doesn't have to mean that there's something wrong with us. Most of the time, simply shows the other person wasn't able or ready to meet us in the way that we needed. And we all deserve relationships where the effort feels mutual and reciprocal, where the communication is consistent. And care isn't something that we have to chase after. It's something that people give with joy. So every rejection, even though it's uncomfortable in the moment, it's one step closer to that kind of connection. And when you stop seeing rejection as a judgment on who you are, it just becomes easier to let go of what isn't working and then stay open to what is. And that shift, to see rejection as a clarity instead of a failure, is where resilience begins to take root. So if rejection has felt especially hard for you, you don't have to navigate it alone. I've created the SecureLove Toolkit to give you practical tools for these exact moments, tools that help calm the nervous system, spot red and green flags more clearly, and stay grounded in what you really want. And it's not about changing who you are. It's about giving yourself the support to move through dating and relationships with more confidence. And over time, these practices help turn rejection from something that feels defeating into something that brings clarity and growth. So you can get instant access to the SecureLove Toolkit in the description, and please drop a comment if this video resonated. I love hearing from you. This is Kaylee Larkin, wishing you a beautiful relational journey.